You're listening to The Bounding Box, where we talk about web development, geo development, and everything in between.
All right, welcome to the Bounding Box. Today I have a great guest here. I have Dr. Joseph Kerski. Dr. Kerski, please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, what's your problem?
Oh, many thanks, Renee. Thanks for having me on here. It's a huge honor, truly. Well, Joseph Kerski here. I'm a GIS professional, I'm a geographer, and I'm also education manager at Esri. That means I serve on the education team supporting schools, libraries, museums, community, technical, tribal colleges, and universities. So anywhere that there's education happening, my team and I want to nurture, support, and encourage those communities. My problem, that's a great question. My problem, challenge is how to help educators and students see the vision for where geotechnology and spatial thinking can take their programs, their own research, their instruction. That's my main challenge and problem.
That's a huge one. I mean, just GIS, geography, and education in general is just, it's not the forefront, I could say, right, in a lot of places. I think geography is kind of mixed in with some social studies here and there. For example, my daughter's in eighth grade. She's in middle school, and she hasn't had a specific geography class, but a little bit's been sprinkled here and there in some of her social studies classes, which I think is a bit unfortunate. But I understand that it's more of interdisciplinary, I suppose. Right?
A good point. At the primary and secondary level, as you're already going right to the heart of the matter, which I salute, the primary way that geospatial technology, remote sensing, GIS, web mapping, GPS is being taught is in, like you say, social studies, science, language arts, mathematics, STEM, sometimes some computer science, but it is largely taught as sort of a with GIS rather than GIS courses per se. There are some exceptions, like the geospatial semester in Virginia, and maybe some of your listeners saw our geospatial semester students on stage at the Esri User Conference this summer, which was a huge joy. Those 3 high school students were so articulate and wonderful, but they're from a program where high school students in Virginia can take a university level course in the high school, and it is actually a GIS course, but that's more of the exception. I'd say about 5% of K-12 schools have a GIS course, and the other 95% are using GIS as an instructional tool, as a resource, using the Living Atlas of the World data layers to teach about biomes or population change, et cetera. At the university level, which we can dig into in a bit, it's a bit different, but you're exactly right.
And it is challenging. Even things like I'd read that Jeopardy Fellows book, Jennings, Maphead, not too long ago,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a whole chapter on the geography bee, and kind of how it takes second spot to the spelling bee. And I looked it up recently, and it even I think has changed from like the organizers and stuff, so it's much smaller, I believe, even now, which is kind of unfortunate, right?
We had Ken Jennings at our National Council for Geographic Education conference one year, and yes, he is a very strong proponent of geography. And as you mentioned, he's also one of the top 3 Jeopardy champions of all time. I think he also went on to host after Alex Trebek passed away for a
Yes.
while. But he was wonderful. It was great to have him, and he touched on in that book something that I think many of your listeners can probably identify. When he was a kid, he was the family navigator on their family trips. So he would hold the road atlas on his lap and help his family navigate through all the exits and the ramps and stuff like that. I love that. I can certainly identify. That was one of my roles as a kid, is I would help my folks do exactly that. So yes, Ken is a great champion of geography.
Those road atlases bring back so many memories. Just if I'm told we're gonna take a trip somewhere, like the first thing I would do is bust out that guide and just try to figure out, okay, where am I going? How am I getting there? Navigate from page what A8 to H64. Type of thing. It was so much fun.
There is something special about actually looking at a paper map. Sometimes people, you and I are in digital mapping and we love geotechnologies, right, Renee? But there is some value to looking at paper maps. One of which is it's not if, when your device fails and you're out in the mountains or in the desert and you have no connectivity, if you don't have a weatherproof paper map, that's actually a safety issue, right? Your life could be in danger. So, and also reading the landscape, understanding how to navigate based on signs on the landscape and so on, and reading a paper map, they're two survival skills for sure. So I think that's valuable. Also, you may have seen this, there is a relatively famous study of the hippocampus part of the brain. And for London cab drivers that actually had what you were referring to, that those atlases of, in this case, London, and having that in their cabs, their hippocampus was bigger. That's the place where our spatial arrangements happen. And having the same study with a control and an experimental group, or in that study, where the control group was only using digital maps and the experimental group was using the paper atlas, the hippocampus was actually larger and fired differently when using the paper atlas, which is kind of interesting. So there's, on a cognitive psychology level, there's and a neuro level, there is some value to actually using these paper documents. Now, do I use digital maps more than paper documents? I certainly do. But
Yes.
like you said, there is some value in the educational research and also on the survival level.
Yeah, just if you ever need to, it's always good to know how to read a paper map, how to make sense of it, the topography on it, the basic directions, how to use a compass if you have to, right?
Indeed. And back on your point about the geography bee, that actually is not happening anymore.
Oh, okay.
There were some mixed feelings. Like you said, it was reduced. It went to a sort of a project-based set of questions, as well as the sort of standard memorization ones. And due to some restructuring at Nat Geo, it actually doesn't happen on a state and national level anymore. There are certain school districts that still do that on their own. And I have mixed feelings about it. The good thing was that it actually was one of the ways that people found out about geography. The sort of the little twingy thing that it gave me and other geographers, and perhaps you as well, is that it was, how should I say this? The blue category in Trivial Pursuit, for some of your listeners that remember what the blue category was, that was the geography category.
Yeah.
And ditto for the geography category in Jeopardy and so on. Geography does not equate to memorizing places, exports of Brazil, state capitals, things like that. So there was always that little tension that it was good because it promoted and helped celebrate geography, but it wasn't all of geography. So I have mixed feelings about it. I still miss it. I was one of the state, level here in Colorado for many years, being a judge. And I just loved encouraging students. Hey, you're taking geography. That's awesome. And so on. So there's other ways to promote geography. But yeah, that sort of had its run, if you will, 25 plus years. Indeed.
And that's the thing with geography. It's just such a wide breadth of things you can study. I mean, you got physical geography, economic geography, cultural, human. Quite a few of my classes were heavily leaning Marxist geography in the readings that we did, and they had more to do with the professors, but it was all interesting. And again, that wide variety of stuff was really cool.
There are indeed, as you're articulating very well, I think there's so many facets to geography, and yet, okay, and there are all the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, health, water, education, they're all spatial. They're all geographic issues, really. So despite that and all of our pressing 21st century problems, wildfires that we were just chatting with before you started the broadcast, and other things that are happening right now, geography is still relatively misunderstood by the general public. So that's one, you touched on this at the beginning, what are my challenges? A lot of it revolves around the sort of the misinformation about geographic technology and the discipline of geography. One could argue that many people going into geotechnologies nowadays don't come into it like you and I did from geography. They come into it from computer science, data science, business, civil engineering, which is a good thing. So there's a widening array and diversity of people going into geotechnologies, which is good. But there's still this geographic perspective that is important. And I think you're touching on one of the chief challenges. Absolutely.
When I worked at I worked for LA County sanitation districts for years, like over a decade. And the biggest proponents there of GIS were a handful of these civil engineers there. They saw the value in it. They really pushed it and supported the small team that we have, which is great.
Indeed, and you're touching on another thing that we deal with in education that's quite exciting, and in other sectors, but that touching, not merging, but at least touching on the people mapping infrastructure, the BIM and CAD community, and the GIS community. You know, with for example, the relationship between Esri and Autodesk. So mapping interior spaces and exterior spaces, having those two systems, those two worlds communicate. You know, for many years, it was like the BIM CAD community was speaking Portuguese, and then the GIS community was speaking Spanish.
Yeah.
So we understood a few words in common, but yet we were kind of in two separate worlds. But now it's a good thing, because if you're designing a resilience plan for natural hazards on a medical center or a university campus or in a community even, you've got to have those two. You've got to have the interior spaces and the exterior spaces talking with each other, so you know where the evacuation routes are, where people are in potentially harm's way, et cetera. So that's a very exciting development, and I think part of it comes from what you're touching on: civil engineering, design, geodesign, et cetera.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, exactly. So I did want to ask you, I have a couple questions I want to ask here. What are some successes and challenges you found in integrating GIS in general education?
Great question. Thank you for asking it. I promise not to overdwell on this, but in the past, it was hardware and software. You know, GIS was for years, hey, Renee, here's this whole set of manuals, and now you go off and learn GIS, and then we'll talk in a couple months or a couple years. Now, true, the Earth is a dynamic planet, and it's complex. There's lots of things happening. There's 8 billion humans, right, affecting the planet. There's natural hazards. The plates are moving, et cetera. There's weather. There's water. There's lots of natural and cultural human forces. So I think geospatial technology is always going to be somewhat inherently complex, because the world is complex and changing. However, in education, that hardware and software challenge is largely gone. Now, there's still some bandwidth issues that we're dealing with in education, but it's no longer this big, arduous front end of having to learn a lot of different tools up front and installing software and getting it to work and all that. With the challenge now in education is, what's the best curricular fit for GIS in your subject matter, or in your courses, or in your program? Another challenge is still, to be honest, standardized tests. Having students memorizing blocks of content and regurgitating that for the test, and probably a lot of your listeners can identify, yeah, that was my experience. And then I have to erase that part of my brain and then memorize a big block of content for the next test. So we're still dealing with some of these educational structures that have existed for decades. GIS is a very, as you know, an inquiry-based, problem-based learning kind of a tool. It's unstructured and there's some uncertainty in it. It's extremely valuable to use as a educational tool, in my opinion, but it's sort of like the sand grains. You know, people know, or take a conglomerate. I used to work at the U.S. Geological Survey, so forgive my spatial analogy here, but take a big, like a soil sample down at a cylinder, down to a certain depth from the surface. The cobbles and pebbles are like the established disciplines that people understand: chemistry, biology, math, etc. The sand grains, or the soil grains that are binding all those things together, is sort of like geospatial technology. It slips through your fingers. It's hard for a lot of people to understand, but yet it binds all the other disciplines together and is inherently an interdisciplinary tool, which a lot of educators love teaching. They love having students bridging the disciplines in modern education. So the appeal is there, but it's still challenging. Like, how does this fit into your program? And it also touches on some other challenges that we face based on your question in education. Demographic changes, the value that people place on, for example, what's the role of higher education in society? I mean, these are big questions, but some universities and colleges are really struggling with enrollment, and as they reinvent, and I wrote a recent essay about this, sometimes with chaos and change comes innovation. So there's lots of very innovative programs, colleges, K-12 educators, professors, and others that are taking this opportunity of chaos, and not just with COVID, but even before COVID in education, to say, hey, what should we teach? Why should we teach it? Who should we teach it to? And so using this opportunity as a sort of a springboard for innovating.
Oh, that's great. That's amazing. That's a fantastic answer. Thank you. Yeah, there's so many challenges in education. I mean, cost as well. I mean, it's university costs
Mm-hmm.
just going through. I have a kid in college right now, so I'm feeling it. But you know, I was lucky enough that I worked for a public agency that helped me pay for school at the time, so that really lucked out there. But yeah, I mean, the cost for education, everything as well, and even some of these certificate programs can cost as much as an entire 2 years at another Cal school or something like a local state college, which is you know, a lot.
Indeed. I work with tribal colleges, tech colleges, community colleges, and many of them have been very diligent about, we're trying to, their focus a lot of times is on workforce development, getting those students jobs and reducing the cost however they can by getting endowments, by getting
Yeah,
donors, and offsetting the cost of education. So they've done a noble job, and a lot of them are a bit more flexible than a big state university in terms of designing programs. For example, we've got a Front Range Community College here in Colorado. They've got 21 GIS courses, Renee.
wow,
That's a lot of
that
courses. Now,
is
they don't
quite a
teach all
bit.
21 every semester, but they have those on the books. They're all approved by the state, et cetera. So they're a bit nimbler than
Yeah,
many larger institutions. But even the larger institutions, I'm working at the University of Denver, for example, and we designed a new course. This is another thing we could talk about, called Digital Earth. We're not calling it GIS. We want to get students in that Digital Earth course, and then we've got another one called Smart Planet, in those courses that maybe even didn't think about going to university
wow,
in the
okay,
first place. So completely reaching outside of the standard, student body recruitment pool. Hey, do you want to make a difference in the world? Do you like using technology for good? Do you like to get outside? Things like that I think are appealing to people. Do you care about the planet? Do you care about people? Sort of the big, broad questions. If so, Digital Earth might be for you. And here's the cool, interesting things that we're going to do in it. So sometimes even the course titles need to be reframed, because some of them, I mean, you and I have typed GIS 101, intro to GIS, intermediate GIS, and some of those courses, they appeal to the geotechnology community, but other people are like, that sounds really boring, or else I don't understand what that even means. So maybe even a restructuring of how we title and describe the courses in the first place might be a good opportunity for us to do.
that's really great. That's a fantastic idea. I hadn't thought about that for students coming in. Just a lot of times they may have empty blocks where they can take courses and look for something interesting. That's a fantastic opportunity to get them in there. That's great.
Yeah, and I think, working with students as I have over the years, and I'm sure you can relate, having students of your own in your own family and working with, in our organization, that most students really, they're not interested in fame and fortune. They really do want to make a difference in the world. And that's very encouraging to me. That as the years have gone by, I've noticed more and more, a much greater percent of students actually, that's really what motivates them. They want to make a positive difference. It's that ikigai diagram from the Japanese. What are you good at? Intersecting all these four circles. What are you good at? What does the world need? What can you be paid for so you could provide for your family? And what do you believe will make a big impact? So, the intersection of all those spheres. Now, am I at the intersection of all those every day on the job? Well, no. And I don't think anybody is
True.
completely. But, thinking about those big circles and how you can, position yourself in your career so that you're touching on at least some of them every day on the job, rather than just kind of, and my heart really goes out to people that feel like they're stuck. I'm waiting till quitting time, and this isn't really my main passion, but I'm stuck here. Yeah, that's a challenge for sure.
That's definitely. I'm very glad that I enjoy the work that I do. I'm found to a great spot there. So
Yeah, I salute you. I'm right with you on, the nice thing about modern geotechnologies is that I think you don't have to put your regular career aspirations on hold. You know, and again, touching on the past, you had to decide, am I going to be a city planner or wildlife biologist or something else that I'm passionate about, or be a geotechnology person? Because it was, you know, geotechnologies tended to be so all encompassing. You had to kind of decide. Now, I think it's more and more possible to have geotech on your tool belt, right, Renee, and be the geodesigner or the wildlife biologist or the city planner or the, you know, the chemical engineer. You know, so it's geotechnology is just like, you know, spatial stats and other things. They're on your tool belt, and it may be something that you touch on several times a week, several times a month, but it doesn't have to be your entire position.
Yeah, for sure. I see a lot of questions come through from young professionals where they may be working some like a planning job or similar type of engineering something, and they want to get in GIS. If they've seen something on it, they're like, "Oh, should I make a career change for it?" And my typical response is, "You don't have to make a career change. You can just start using those tools today to help you improve the career you have."
I'm right with you. And I think the web paradigm, right, the web GIS paradigm with data as services, with ArcGIS Online, analytical tools, and other forces that are along those lines have helped. It's raised the adoption so significantly because there's this lessening of the tech barriers. Like you said, if someone goes into ArcGIS Online a couple times a week, makes some maps, does some analysis, does some classification, symbology, shares that in an instant app. I mean, just it's kind of like learning a language. You're touching on it every week, and you're building your skills. And one of the things that I ask people to do, just encourage people to do, is make a story map of your CV or resume, right, Renee? It's like, hey, every
Yes.
quarter, update it, and you can use some new story maps tools, and it's fun. And I think it helps nudge your application to your potential employer up a couple of notches because not everybody does it. And you don't have to do any external research. It's all in your head, what you've accomplished. And so you can put in, you know, different places where you had your internship, where you had this position over here, where you went to college, et cetera. And I still have a paper, you know, PDF from my Word doc of my CV, but I also have a story map. So I'm not encouraging people to do anything that I haven't, you know, I'm not practicing what I'm preaching here is the point. But that's another way of sort of keeping toes into those GIS waters.
Exactly. I have to say that the people I've interviewed, the ones that provided a story map or some kind of a presentation of their work, I mean, it stands out. It honestly does. Sets you apart from the
Indeed,
rest.
it can be a part and it's part of your digital portfolio, which of course nowadays most everybody has to have. Mm-hmm.
So I also want to ask you, how do you think GIS and geography students are going to help shape the future going forward? The industry or anything else?
Great question. Well, I would say increasingly with this web GIS paradigm that we're talking about, first of all, GIS professionals will come from increasingly non-geography enviro fields, which is a good thing. We need that wider, more diverse array of conversations happening with people from computer science, data science, civil engineering, sociology, other fields that are using pieces of the geotechnology platform. So it's going to be people from a wider variety of disciplines in the future. It's also an opportunity, though, for those of us that have a firm immersion in geodatabases, map projections, all the fundamentals of GIS to show some leadership that, okay, maybe you in the School of Business or a business professional, you're using Business Analyst Web to look at target markets, do supply chain management, analysis, et cetera. Let's say you're doing a study on potential shipping routes across the Arctic Ocean. Hey, there's something called map projections, and there's something called the polar map projection. So helping them to see some of the things that they don't have time to get all of the foundations, but they want to use pieces of the GIS platform. So that's an opportunity for the fundamental GI science community to show some leadership to help those other people that use it occasionally, or they haven't had a background to understand some of the implications of that, and also the implications of choosing the appropriate colors, map projections, symbology, classification method, how to share it, what to share, when not to share, when to share, all of that sort of thing. So I think that, to your point, the GI science and geography grads will still help shape the industry because they're the ones with this deep and rich foundation to help the broadening array of folks that want to use some of it, but that's not their main passion. That's not their main role.
Oh, that's amazing. I totally agree with you on that one. 100%. Now, Dr. Kerski, I do want to be respectful of your time here, but before I let you go, you got any tips, tricks, advice for listeners, even if it's not geography related at all? What do you have?
Renee, that's a great question. I would answer as follows. First of all, learning version X of software Y is important. Learning the geotechnology tools is still going to matter. Even in our geo AI enabled world, it's still important to understand how the tools work, when to apply them. But the most important tool is your brain. So nurture your brain. That is going to be the most important tool going forward. No matter how sophisticated and easy to use geospatial technology or any other tools get in the future, be a lifelong learner and nurture that brain of yours. I would also say that being curious will open many, many doors for you, you listeners. Be curious about the world. Ask questions. Ask questions while you're a student that your professor's not even asking you. When you're in the workplace, ask questions that your supervisor's not even asking you. Those are the kind of valued employees that we at Esri really want to have and other organizations want to have. So be curious and ask questions. Also, I would say develop a healthy critical view of maps, data, and methods. Always be critical, knowing that everybody is a map producer nowadays. Everybody can create and share data. Do you know if that data is trustworthy? Is it suitable for your needs? Especially as more and more geographic content gets placed online, understand where it came from, who created it, what scale was it created at, how often it's updated, etc. In our data-rich, big data world, I think developing a healthy critical view of data, but also methods, software, and maps is important. Don't just believe everything you see on the internet, right? Don't believe every single map you see. Okay, maps are powerful, but they also should be viewed thoughtfully and critically. That's what I would say. I hope that's helpful.
That is fantastic, sir. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Renee. Awesome. Be spatial.
Thank you for listening to the Bounding Blocks today. Please subscribe for more content.